Hello and welcome to Produce Talks, the CPMA podcast. I am your host and CPMA Education Manager, Jason Gorley. If you haven't had a chance yet, take a look at elearning.cpma.ca and you can check out everything that we're offering in terms of online learning, webinars, and podcasts. This month on Produce Talks, we turn our attention to a project aimed at addressing food security issues in northern communities. Glenn Scott from AgriArctic joins us to discuss the Agridome, and a controlled environment growing facility that is operating year-round in Whitehorse. Currently, Glenn is conducting a feasibility study to determine the viability of commercial production facilities throughout the north. Glenn, thanks for joining us. Glad you could be here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start off with, why is this something you want to explore? Why is growing food in northern areas year-round so important?
Well, growing things year-round in northern environments is critically important, especially in the context of food security. Food security, I think, has been very, very amply mentioned on national and international media. A lot of it highlighting that many of the major problems that we're having keeping people properly fed in northern environments. But when it comes to the Agridome, what sort of role that might play, it's important to keep in mind that people aren't only going to be eating vegetables. That a lot of these people in northern communities are going to be eating a variety of different things, everything from store-bought products to country food, which they've been surviving on for millennia. But a key part of that, though, I think, is also going to be agricultural production. And I think that the technology is finally there. The technology has finally been worked through. And at times in the food security, because it has potential, a very, very strong potential to give people food sovereignty. It gives people a very, very critical control over their food supply. And I got into this, actually, as I was originally working as a climate change technician over at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So I've been there for several years, had the opportunity to go and work in a number of northern communities, a number of northern research stations, had the opportunity to see a lot of the hardships that people go through when it comes to the sheer logistics of trying to keep people fed.
I think everybody does hear those news stories that it's important every once in a while. I was on a project once where I spent a weekend in Rankin Inlet, and I went to the store to buy an apple, and I couldn't believe what the price was. I can't remember what it was right now, but I remember being shocked. I guess the idea is that by growing the food in the north, you're also lowering that price and just increasing the availability, and that's how it's battling the food security issue?
Yes, absolutely. It not only creates availability, but it also should, as long as you have a viable solution, it should be able to reduce those prices, and at the same time also offer people fresh food, which is something which is almost entirely lacking in a lot of these northern communities. It's a very common problem in a lot of those stores. Those food items have had to travel such long distances, and by the time that they actually get to the people up there, they're in awfully rough shape. I remember living in Churchill. People used to joke about the bananas that would arrive by train there. We called them Arctic bananas, and they were jet black. I think that's one of the things that certainly start to address with this technology. It gets you from farm to plate within potentially a day's time, because you're actually growing it directly right there in those communities.
So let's talk about that. And can you just tell me what the Agridome is?
The Agridome is a bit of a curio in the sense that what it is it's a small geodesic structure. It's essentially a hemisphere. And inside that hemisphere, it's nicely insulated with approximately 2.5 inches insulation and then completely lined on the inside with mylar. And the entire idea is that I'm trying to maximize energy efficiency. That's really the key to any sort of agricultural production in northern communities, is that you've got to be able to address energy. Energy in these communities is very, very expensive. In some of these communities, some of them are paying upwards of $1.25 per kilowatt hour, which means that you can't really use conventional farming, or rather a conventional greenhouse technique. You've got to have something which is specifically designed for maximum energy efficiency. All the mylar on the inside of it, that does look a little bit like the inside of a spaceship, and it does certainly make for a very, very interesting comment. Of course, I do want to get away from any sort of spaceship comment, because at the same time that I'm trying to promote energy efficiency, I also want something which is going to be very, very simple in concept. I don't want to scare people away from it by having something that looks far too complex. I've got to be able to reduce the complexity, because when these are actually introduced in northern communities, you're going to be dealing with people who don't have degrees in agriculture, who don't have advanced degrees in biology or in electronic engineering. I've got to be able to simplify that concept as much as possible, and that's been one of the major objectives of this project.
Describe when you first thought of this Agridome. Like, how did this concept come about?
Well, the concept came about when I was originally doing my first bit of research into food security, and I very, very quickly realized that production is very, very closely linked to structure in these northern communities. I saw this at a lot of the northern research bases, in some of the northern communities as well. People struggling to try to find appropriate structures for these environments, all of which, of course, relates back to that idea of energy efficiency. What's the most energy efficient structure out there? And so over the course of that research, I was eventually introduced to the concept of geodesic dome, and eventually came across a company in Alaska called Intershelter Domes, who had been marketing these as emergency shelters all throughout the world. I think that one of their last deployments actually was down in the Antarctic. I was hooking up with them and helped them to construct dome in Alaska, and then eventually found out that there was a distributor right here in Whitehorse who was actually redistributing these domes for Canadian consumers, Here Hyde at Hideaway Domes, and he actually had one of these domes set up in his backyard. And so I approached him and I said, as opposed to having that in your backyard, let's put it to use, let's do the research, let's prove this concept, and let's make it happen. And he was nice enough to donate the dome to this project, and I've been using it for the last year and a half.
And so the fact that the dome almost looks like a puzzle, that's just the way it's sold?
Yeah, that's the way it's sold, although it's sold that way for a reason. It's, that dome actually breaks down into 22 or 23 individual pieces, which makes it especially easy to ship. Each one of those pieces, they're approximately 5 feet by 5 feet, and each one of those can actually be packed in 2 8-foot crates, which makes them incredibly easy to ship out to very, very remote locations. And on top of that, because it's been very, very finely worked out, they're actually very, very easy to reassemble. Once you get those crates into some sort of northern environment, it takes 3 or 4 people one morning to put one of those together.
Okay, so that's putting the dome together, and then the other pieces are, I assume it can be shipped easily as well?
The other pieces actually are a little bit more complicated, and the big thing actually would be the insulation that goes on the inside of the dome. Ideally with these domes, what you would want to be using is you'd want to be using foam insulation. It's, when you're dealing with a round structure like this, you're presented with a very, very interesting construction problem in the sense that all construction materials out there are really meant for rectilinear structures. Everything's straight, everything's flat. And so here I am trying to put a insulation system into a structure like that. If I could use foam, then it wouldn't matter. If I could use foam, it means that I could probably get that done over the course of a day and actually get that done very, very cheaply. Foam would be absolutely ideal to put on the inside of a spherical surface. But once you put foam on the inside of a structure like this, you make it permanent. And because of what I'm doing at Yukon College, it's a fixed-term project. It means that it's a temporary structure, which means that I had sourced out a number of different materials here in Whitehorse from quite frankly, from the local hardware store to be able to contrive an insulation system for the inside of it. So that part actually turned out to be a little bit complicated, but I did successfully do it.
So I think we're starting to piece together what it looks like, but maybe we can compare it to a couple of other growing environments that people might be more familiar with. So greenhouse or hothouse production. Are there similarities, or is this a completely different animal altogether?
Not a completely different animal in the sense that with all kinds of greenhouse structures or hothouse structures, you're trying to control the internal environment to at least a certain extent. But where it becomes a bit of a different animal, though, is that with most hothouses and all greenhouses out there, what you're trying to do is you're trying to capitalize on sunlight. You're essentially taking advantage of a free input, the free sunshine. But when you're dealing with a remote northern environment, though, if you engineer a structure to let in the light, you're also engineering the structure to let out the heat. And the heat is really the key variable. And so I have to go with a completely controlled environment agriculture, something which is completely sealed off from the outside environment. And I have to provide artificial lighting. But I managed to keep those heating costs down, and it's been working out magnificently.
So maybe you could take us back and tell us about the first time that you assembled the Agridome. So you had it assembled, and you walk in, and you're ready to put those plants in there and see how this works. Tell us about what that was like.
That was actually a very, very memorable experience. Because that was actually at the point where I had just finished installing the Mylar, but I hadn't actually had a chance to put in the lights yet. And really, when I had that first wow moment was the point that I actually installed the first light, and I just instantly saw what the Mylar was capable of doing. It was redirecting all of that light right down into the center of the dome, and it was really quite spectacular. I was only using 400 watts of light at that point in time with a single light fixture, and it was really one of those, like as I said, it was one of those wow moments when I stood back and I suddenly realized that, like, my God, this is actually going to work. Like it's actually come from concept. It's come from some very, very inspiring schematics, but now I have it. Now it's here and it's going to work.
So you started with aeroponics, and then what happened after that? Maybe first you could explain a little bit about what aeroponics is for people that don't know what it is.
Aeroponics would be the concept of growing plants in air, which is especially appropriate because, quite frankly, when it comes down to it, that's what all plants are actually growing in. That's actually what the plants need for most and first. So with an aeroponic system, what you're doing is you are not using soil, and what you're doing is you're essentially suspending the roots of the plants in a nutrient mist, and that nutrient mist is supplied by misting nozzles, which have to maintain a certain pressure, which is generated by a very, very high energy pump. So aeroponics is known to be able to reduce a lot of your inputs and also very, very dramatically boost productivity. It reduces your inputs because you have to use less water, and productivity should be at least 50% more than what you would normally be getting from any sort of soil-based system. But aeroponics does present a bit of a problem, and that problem comes down to energy usage and also troubleshooting. It's in order to be able to generate that sort of pressure, it means you've got to have a very, very high draw pump. And considering that one of the major objectives of my project is to reduce energy usage, I found that it just wasn't energy efficient. It was just simply drawing far too much. And on top of that, those nozzles also tend to clog fairly frequently. And considering that one of my major objectives is to increase the simplicity and to try to make these domes as easy to operate as possible, I felt that would be a little bit too much for a new northern farmer. And so midway through the project, I had to approach the YRC and tell them that, you know what, I'm just not entirely convinced with the aeroponics. Aeroponics is known to work beautifully in southern environments where you've got nice, cheap electricity and such, but I need to convert to something simpler. And so I came up with a concept of vertical ebb and flow tape, based specifically on hydroponics, where as opposed to the roots sprayed by nutrient mist, the roots actually dangle into flowing water, which is flowing down the inside of the vertical rack, and it's been working very, very well. It dramatically increased the simplicity of the system, and I'm able to actually operate those ebb and flow tables with some very, very easy pumps that I was actually able to source out from the local hardware store, and don't draw very much power. So I did that conversion, and I'm very happy with the way that things have gone.
And now it's time for a quick break to hear from CPMA Membership Chair, Les Mallard. Les, I'm wondering if you can let me know some of the benefits that Chiquita has with being a member of CPMA.
Thanks, Jason, for this opportunity. The CPMA value equation spans many areas of interest for Chiquita. However, one of the areas of interest I want to key in on is the CPMA annual convention. The convention offers touchpoint opportunities with all the major players in the Canadian produce industry in various settings, whether business or social. No other produce function in Canada offers the scope the CPMA annual convention offers. Having this is a tremendous value for our organization.
Thanks, Les. And now back to the conversation. Let's talk about some of the other inputs. So how are heat and light coming into the Agridome?
Heat and light. The light is provided by high-pressure sodium lamps, which does put me a little bit at odds from from some of the other newer installations out there. In the sense that a lot of people want to use LEDs. LEDs are sort of the latest, greatest kind of light out there in the sense that you're providing only the kinds of light that are required by the plant, and then therefore should be able to increase your energy efficiency. But one of the problems with LEDs, though, is that they're not known to be able to productively grow vegetables. So rather, you can grow the vegetables, but they just don't grow very fast when you're trying to use LED lights. And considering that these northern communities they're much bigger on the hard fruiting vegetables than they are on the leafy greens, I've got to have a lighting system in there which is capable of producing those vegetables. And so I decided to go with the high pressure sodiums, which are known to be able to do that very, very effectively. And that actually relates to how I heat the dome. It actually answers part of that question as well, because quite frankly, Those lights, and I've got a total of 2,200 watts worth of lights in there, are essentially commanding the heat budget. Those lights themselves are essentially heating the dome. I do have a backup space heater when those lights go off. I've got things on a regular diurnal cycle here where they have to go off 6 hours for every day, and the space heater will make up the remainder of its budget.
You mentioned there about the types of vegetables that you're growing require that light. So what are you growing, and how did you choose what to grow?
I've been growing a fairly wide variety of different sorts of vegetables. I initially started off trying to grow as many different types as I possibly could to try to do some observations of what might do well, what might not do quite as well, and wound up growing quite the broad variety. But then I had to refocus the research and basically concentrate on just a few different species of plants to be able to gauge exactly how well what I'm actually doing with the dome when it comes to a productivity. And after all, at the end of the day, I've got to have that productivity. It's by far the most important factor. In terms of individual species, I did actually start off with leafy greens, nice and fast growing, and that makes it very, very easy for me to be able to compare results. And so among the leafy greens, I grew a very wide variety of basil, of Swiss chard. I've had great success with red Russian kale. It's been doing beautifully. It has been doing beautifully in those racks. Just a few months ago, I also decided to start including vegetables. Really, the touchstone is tomatoes. If I can productively grow tomatoes in there, I feel that I could productively grow just about anything. And tomatoes are a great crop. It's something that people recognize right off the bat. That's really the ultimate goal. And in addition to the tomatoes, I'm also doing peppers, doing quite a wide variety of them. And they've been doing well, and I'm looking forward to another harvest.
So right now you're growing only vegetables, you said. So is there opportunity to expand into other types of fruit production or even berry production? Do you think?
There is definitely. It's with these racks, you can grow basically any kind of plant, any kind of plants you want. It's just a matter of whether you can actually do it effectively. But yes, there is definitely some opportunity to expand there. I know that other people have been experimenting with strawberries and other sorts of berry crops. Some of the other hard fruits might be a little bit difficult though. Obviously tree fruits I think will be largely out of the question. Although you know what, having said that, there's actually a setup in Iceland where they've just recently grown a banana. So it does certainly highlight the fact that once you properly control the environment and use units like this, you do have some pretty high potential to grow a wide variety of different things.
Let's talk about this partnership. So you have a partnership with Yukon Research Center to run this feasibility study that you're currently in the middle of. Can you describe that initial conversation, how that went? You went to them and said, I want to grow lettuce in Whitehorse in the middle of January. And yep. What was their response?
Well, let's see. I approached them, I think it was a couple of years ago. With my initial concept, it was a little bit too big and a little bit too unwieldy. I wanted to do far too many things all at once, which I think is a very, very common problem with a lot of new entrepreneurs. And I think that the staff of the Yukon Research Center have gone through a number of different wild and wacky conversations with different entrepreneurs coming through. But they were good enough, though, to sit down with me and to help me to refine the concept and eventually refine it into something which would be actually doable at Yukon College. So that wasn't so much really an initial conversation. It was a whole series of conversations that took place over the course of a number of months. I would go into that first conversation. They would shoot a couple of the ideas down, but give me a few ideas. I would come back a month later with a revised idea. A very, very similar process until eventually, a few months down the road, we had something. It wasn't just simply that conversation as well. What I did with Keir Hyde at Hideaway Domes, I actually started doing proof of concept in his dome in his backyard. I actually set up a small-scale hydroponics unit there, and I think that between demonstrating my sheer will to try to get things done and also having a refined concept from the YRC, I think that between those two different factors, they eventually said, yes, let's do it.
Very cool. And how important has this partnership been for all the partners involved, yourself and them as well? Maybe you could describe that relationship as it exists now.
Critical. It simply wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that partnership. And it's good that there are actually sources of public money out there where people can actually do investment into what would otherwise be very, very risky projects. It's, for instance, a lot of businesses out there who are going to be looking for returns. It can sometimes be a little bit difficult doing that kind of risky research. You've got investors, you've got people who are going to be expecting returns immediately. So it's good that there was that source of public funding out there, and it has been absolutely critical. And but it's more than just simply the money. I mean, it's been access to the expertise. It's been access to their network of other individuals who might be doing who might be doing related things. And by virtue of that, it means that I've been introduced to quite a lot of different people and different organizations, and that's given me the impetus to continue to move this forward, even after the conclusion of this project at Yukon College.
What are the outcomes that you're looking for? Ideally, you're able to say that the Agridome does what?
Well, it's called a feasibility study, which implies that essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to demonstrate can you actually do this with this kind of technology. I'm already at the point where I can sit back and say that, yes, this is absolutely and entirely feasible. We had a number of different baselines that had to be achieved over the course of the project, and those baselines would be things like water usage, how much energy you're using, how much labor are you putting into it, and then, of course, at the very end of the day, what sort of productivity? Because that productivity, essentially, is that drives the financial model. As I said previously, it's like you've got to demonstrate that not only is it feasible, but is it actually worthwhile? And so right now we're at the point where, yes, feasibility has been demonstrated, but I will have to be doing further research in order to be able to boost that productivity up to the point that I can go into full commercialization.
So your goal with this is to develop commercial production, or to develop production so that home gardeners can have their own agridomes?
It would definitely be for commercial production. This system, even with the maximum amount of simplification, would still be just a little bit too much for your average home gardener out there. These systems will be specifically geared for northern entrepreneurs or for public organizations that want to address food security issues.
Well, let's talk about that then, because you have proof of concept, you're saying, in Whitehorse, but what about some remote communities? Is that kind of a next step for another feasibility study, or is that just kind of something that you're going to hope to evolve as organizations look to tackle food security?
No, that is very, very much the next step, and I'm already in discussions with a couple of different organizations who are already located in very remote communities. Because I have to go into the next phase, which will be something a little bit between feasibility and also prototyping. But once I'm at the stage of prototyping, I've actually got to have boots on the ground, and I've actually got to be in these very, very remote northern communities. Whitehorse is, it's somewhat remote, but it's still patched into the road system. And on top of that, the climate here, especially over the course of this January, hasn't exactly been terribly arctic. And so I really, really need to be in these places that I intend to solve problems for.
Okay, so how does this scale up? Is it bigger domes? Is it just more domes? How does it become a successful venture in your eyes?
It could go in either one of two different directions. You could take the same size of dome and essentially attach them into a series of domes. And that was actually the original concept, was to take these 20-foot diameter domes and attach them into a large pod. What you could, for instance, what you could have is you could have a series of 7 domes, each of which would be directly connected to each other, and you'd have one central dome which would supply the electricity, it would supply the water, it would give you a place to stick the computers, it would give you working space, and then to use the other 6 domes to grow whatever sorts of crops that you feel are the most appropriate for your particular community. So that would be one way of doing it. The next way of doing it would be far larger domes. That is actually something which I'm very, very actively exploring right now. I've managed to find a reliable Canadian supplier of domes, so I'm hoping to work together with him in conjunction with another hydroponics company to try to establish a prototype in one of the remote northern communities that I had mentioned.
Let's look down the road. 5-10 years. What do you think this project means for food security in the North?
I think this project, as long as I'm able to successfully get through a prototyping phase, will provide one of the key solutions for food security. If I were to be looking at a completely successful 5 to 10 years down the road, I would be looking to at least a number of large-scale domes deployed through the Canadian Arctic. And for me, that would really be the success, is to actually be able to get these ventures out there with buy-in from various entrepreneurs and public organizations, and then, of course, ultimately to know that people are actually being properly fed, that they actually have food sovereignty, that they actually have control over their food supply and over their destiny. At the risk of being a little bit melodramatic, but that's really what it comes down to. Can you control how you live?
Are there opportunities to take the lessons that you've learned and apply them to other environments, or is this technology specific for colder climates? I'm even thinking of Ontario or Prince Edward Island. Can the lessons that you've learned be applicable across Canada, or even different climates, hotter climates that have different issues for different reasons?
the lessons that have been learned so far would definitely be applicable. Anywhere where energy is unusually expensive, where you might not have regular access to water, and where you might be very, very remote from a more conventional food supply chain. So those lessons would definitely be applicable. In terms of the overall system itself, in terms of using insulated domes in these environments, that's really more geared towards cold climates. There might be some applicability in unusually dry climates, in the sense that these domes are also incredibly efficient when it comes to a water usage. But for the most part, though, these systems will be geared towards cold climates, whether that's anywhere in northern Canada, whether that's elsewhere in the circumpolar Arctic, or perhaps at some of the bases in the Antarctic.
So, is there anything else that I have failed to touch on that you want to cover?
Yeah, I suppose that one of the only other things is that certainly was something that's involving the integration of a number of different systems like this. That there will always be questions, there will always be things that people think of after the fact, and I am readily reachable. I've got a website. I've got a number of different profiles of social media, and feel free to give me a call.
Okay, Glenn, I want to thank you very much for coming on the podcast. This was really interesting, and I think you can tell from my list of questions that I was just fascinated by this as soon as I found out about it. And you mentioned that people can find you on the website. Can you give us the website and a couple of maybe your social media contacts?
The website is agriarctic.com, so that's agriarctic.com. And that would be the main point of contact there. There's a contact page, also my telephone number. And on social media, you can find me on Facebook at Agriarctic, and you can also find me on Twitter under the exact same name, Agriarctic.
Perfect. And I will put all of those details in the description. And that's all that we have for you this month on Produce Talks. I'd like to thank Glenn Scott very much for taking the time to connect with us. And I'd like to thank you for listening. If you want to get a hold of us, you can reach us by emailing podcast@cpma.ca. And you can check out the description of this podcast for links to Agriarctic, their Facebook, and their Twitter accounts. Music in this episode was Clap and Yell from bensound.com. And until next time, make a healthy choice. Fill half your plate with fruits and veggies.